Sarah stood inside her childhood home holding a warm apple pie, its sweet smell drifting through the crowded Thanksgiving house. But the pleasant scent did nothing to calm the tight knot twisting in her stomach. Around her, 20 relatives laughed and chatted loudly as if nothing in the world could go wrong. None of them knew she had lost her marketing job 2 weeks earlier. She had not told a single person yet. "Smile and breathe," Sarah whispered to herself softly. "Just survive tonight. Pretend everything is fine for now." From the outside, the Brown family looked perfect to anyone passing by. Their large white house on Oak Street was filled with framed photos arranged carefully on every wall. Deborah's medical school graduation hung proudly above the fireplace, while Mark's law degree stood tall in the hallway. Sarah's college picture sat half-hidden behind other frames on a small dusty table in the corner. She had worked 3 years at a tech company before being laid off during restructuring. "It's just business," her boss had said. But to Sarah it felt painfully personal. Her older sister Deborah had everything their mother admired and praised. At 32, she worked as a successful surgeon with a wealthy husband named Eric. Their 2 children, Vivian and James, were considered little geniuses according to every family newsletter. Mark, the youngest at 27, had already passed the bar exam and secured a position at a top law firm. Helen spoke about Deborah and Mark like they were gifts she proudly displayed. But whenever she mentioned Sarah, her voice dimmed. Sarah always felt like an afterthought waiting for approval. In the kitchen, Sarah placed her apple pie gently on the counter, hoping it would earn at least one kind word. She had followed her grandmother's recipe step by step, remembering how comforting those moments used to be. Helen stepped inside immediately, her critical eyes scanning the crust. "It looks uneven," she said with a frown. "Did you use the wrong temperature again?" Sarah replied softly. 350, just like the recipe. Helen sighed. "Deborah's pies always come out perfectly golden. She has better hands. Must be the surgeon in her." While setting the table, Helen snapped, "Sarah, go check on your cousins. Don't just stand around." Sarah walked into the living room where her cousins were sharing their latest achievements. Emma had just made partner at her law firm, and Michael was preparing to open his 5th restaurant. "How's marketing these days?" Emma asked casually. "Busy," Sarah lied with a polite smile. Her phone buzzed again, another rejection email. Before she could hide her disappointment, the front door opened as Deborah entered confidently, drawing everyone's attention instantly. Sarah faded quietly into the background again. Deborah walked in carrying a perfect homemade dessert, her hair neatly styled as if she had stepped out of a magazine. "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone," she said cheerfully, and relatives rushed to greet her. Helen hurried forward, hugging her tightly. "You look beautiful, Deborah. How do you do it all?" she asked proudly. Deborah laughed softly. "Good planning, Mom. That's all." She glanced at Sarah briefly. "Hey, Sarah," she said politely. "Hi," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. The room naturally organized itself around Deborah's presence, leaving Sarah standing quietly near the doorway. Moments later, Mark arrived wearing a tailored suit even though it was a holiday. Helen practically glowed as she hugged him. "Look at you, my rising star," she said happily. "You didn't have to dress up." Mark chuckled. "Old habits," he said. "Court brain never shuts off." Sarah watched from behind the kitchen door as relatives praised him for passing his bar exam. "You must be so proud," Aunt Julie said to Helen. "Of course I am," Helen replied loudly. "Mark has always been focused, always driven." Sarah felt invisible again. Dinner was finally announced, and everyone moved to the long dining table filled with turkey, stuffing, and bright candles. Helen took her place at the head, with Deborah on her right and Mark on her left. Sarah was seated near the far end between Cousin Sophia and Uncle Rick. The placement said everything without words. As plates were passed around, Helen tapped her wine glass. "Before we eat, let's share what we're thankful for," she declared. Deborah stood first. "I'm grateful for my patients, my kids, and Eric's new promotion," she said proudly. Applause filled the room as Deborah sat down smiling. Mark stood next. I'm thankful for starting my new job, passing the bar, and all the support from this family, he said with confidence. More praise followed, along with Helen's proud nods. Then her eyes turned toward Sarah. Her smile changed, losing warmth. Sarah, what about you? She asked. Still working at that little tech company? Sarah's hands shook slightly. Actually, the company downsized, she said softly. I'm looking for new opportunities now. The entire room fell silent instantly. Forks stopped. Conversations ended. Even the children looked up. Helen's face tightened with disappointment. So, unemployed, she said loudly. Is that what we're calling it? Aunt Julie tried to defend her, but Helen raised a hand. Don't make excuses, she snapped. At Sarah's age, Deborah was already a surgeon. Mark was already on his way to becoming a lawyer. And Sarah? She looked at her daughter with cold eyes. What exactly are you doing with your life? Sarah swallowed hard as heat rose in her cheeks. She wished she could disappear. Helen leaned back in her chair as if preparing a speech. I just don't understand, she continued loudly. How does one daughter manage to fall behind so badly? Sarah stared at her plate, unable to speak. Deborah shifted uncomfortably. Mom, maybe not tonight, she whispered. When then? Helen replied sharply. Should we pretend everything is fine? Should we ignore the obvious? Cousin Emma lowered her eyes. Uncle Rick cleared his throat. But nobody stopped Helen. Your sister bought a 7-bedroom house. Mark drives a BMW. And you? Helen said coldly. You're barely getting by. Sarah opened her mouth, but Helen cut her off again. Do you know how embarrassing it is when my friends ask about you? Helen said. I tell them you work in marketing because saying you're unemployed is too humiliating. Grandma finally spoke from the far end of the table. Helen, that's enough. But Helen ignored her. Look at your cousins, she continued, waving her hand across the room. Emma made partner this year. Michael owns restaurants. Sophia works at Google. And you, Sarah. She tapped the pie on the table. You made this. That's all. Mom, please stop, Deborah said softly. Helen sighed dramatically. Deborah, don't defend her. Someone needs to give Sarah a reality check. Mark looked down, avoiding eye contact. You're almost 30, Helen said, turning toward Sarah again. No husband, no house, no stability, nothing to show. Sarah's chest tightened. That's not fair, she whispered. Helen raised an eyebrow. Fair? Life isn't fair, Sarah. Your siblings worked harder. You always gave up. On school, on your engagement, on opportunities. She paused and added cruelly. Even your pie is burned on the edges. Typical. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she forced herself not to let them fall. Mom, Mark said quietly, maybe we should just eat. Helen shot him a sharp look. Don't start, Mark. You succeeded because I pushed you. If I had pushed Sarah more, maybe she wouldn't be so directionless now. Aunt Julie stood suddenly. Helen, this is cruel. Helen scoffed. Cruel? I'm being honest. Should I pretend she isn't falling behind? Grandma shook her head. You're not helping her. You're breaking her. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, still silent. Finally, Sarah stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Everyone looked up in shock. She had never confronted her mother before. You want to know what I do with my life? Sarah said, her voice steady but trembling underneath. Helen folded her arms. Yes, please. Enlighten us. Sarah took a deep breath. While working at that small tech company, I built something of my own. Something you know nothing about. Helen rolled her eyes. Another one of your hobbies. Sarah shook her head. A counseling service. Online support for people recovering from toxic families. The room froze. I help young adults with trauma, Sarah continued. Especially those who grew up with narcissistic parents who made them feel worthless. Deborah's fork slipped from her hand. I have 1,500 clients, Sarah said. 1,500 people who pay monthly for guidance. Gasps echoed around the table. Helen let out a short, sarcastic laugh. You expect us to believe that? Sarah held up her phone. I can show you. Reviews. Testimonials. Bank statements. Mark's eyes widened. You wrote a whole program. Sarah nodded. Yes. And it's helping people. That cannot be real, Helen snapped. You wouldn't understand, Sarah said calmly. You never supported anything I cared about. You mocked my art. You called psychology a weak subject. So I stopped telling you about my dreams because you always found a way to crush them. Deborah's eyes filled with tears. Sarah. I didn't know. None of you knew, Sarah replied. Because I hid it to protect myself. She lifted her chin. And the money I borrowed 6 months ago? It wasn't for car repairs. It was for business licenses and building my website. Helen laughed sharply. This is ridiculous. You're making this up. Sarah walked closer, placing her phone in front of Helen. Business registration. Client dashboard. Income reports. All real. Helen looked stunned for the first time. I signed a book deal last month, Sarah added softly. Title: Breaking Free from Family Chains. The publisher approached me after reading my articles. Deborah covered her mouth. You wrote a book. Yes, Sarah said. Because people relate to my story. People who grew up feeling like they were never enough. Silence filled every corner of the room. Sarah didn't stop there. I also teach baking classes to people with anxiety. That burned pie you mocked. She pointed toward it. It's meant to look rustic. It helps clients focus on creation, not perfection. Aunt Julie clapped softly before stopping when Helen glared at her. And I've been saving for a therapy center, Sarah continued. A real one. A building where people can heal from families like this. Mark looked up suddenly. You're opening a center. Like an actual facility. Sarah nodded. Yes. And I already have investors interested. Helen's voice cracked with frustration. None of this changes the fact that you're still trying to embarrass this family. Sarah shook her head. No. I'm trying to survive this family. Deborah whispered. Mom, she's telling the truth. Mark added quietly. I've been in therapy too. Because of the pressure to be perfect. Helen stared at them in disbelief. What is happening? She demanded. Grandma stood. The truth, Helen. That's what's happening. Sarah took a slow breath. You asked what I do with my life. This helping people is what I do. And I'm proud of it. Helen pushed her chair back sharply. So now I'm the villain, she demanded. Sarah met her gaze calmly. I didn't say that. I said you made me feel small my whole life. Helen scoffed. You're overreacting. Mark shook his head. No, Mum. She isn't. You pushed us so hard that I developed panic attacks. The room gasped softly. Helen stared at him. You. Panic attacks. Mark nodded slowly. Yes. Because you tied love to achievement. Deborah whispered. She did the same to me. Helen suddenly looked overwhelmed, but still refused to admit fault. Grandma walked to the head of the table and placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. Helen, sit down. Listen for once. Helen's lips tightened. Mother, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Grandma replied firmly. You expect perfection because you needed it to feel valuable. Sarah looked at her grandmother with surprise. Helen paled. Don't bring up the past. Grandma shook her head. Why not? You became a mother before you were emotionally ready. And instead of healing, you poured your wounds onto your children. The entire room fell into stunned silence. Suddenly Sarah's father, John, stood from the table, something he rarely did. His hands trembled slightly. Helen. I'm done pretending. Helen blinked. Done with what? John pulled a notebook from his jacket. This. Your cruelty toward Sarah. I've written down every moment for the last 3 years. Helen's face filled with confusion. Why would you do that? Because a lawyer told me it mattered, he said. I filed for divorce 2 weeks ago. Chairs shifted. Deborah covered her mouth. Mark froze. Grandma nodded quietly, as if she had known this was coming. Helen's voice rose in disbelief. You can't be serious. John nodded. I've never been more serious. For 28 years, I watched you destroy Sarah's confidence. I stayed silent to keep peace, but it wasn't peace. It was fear. Sarah felt her breath catch. Dad, she whispered. John turned to her gently. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I should have protected you. I failed you. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. Helen slammed her hand on the table. This is unbelievable. You're all turning against me. Grandma corrected her. No. They're finally standing up. Deborah suddenly wiped her tears and spoke shakily. Mom. I'm miserable. Helen frowned. What are you talking about? Deborah breathed deeply. I became a surgeon because you wanted it. Not because I did. Helen shook her head. No. You always wanted medicine. No, Mom, Deborah whispered. I wanted to be a teacher. More gasps filled the room. You said teaching was for people who couldn't do better, Deborah continued. So I chose a life that breaks me. I take medication just to get through my days. Helen stared, stunned and speechless. Mark stood as well, his hands nervously adjusting his shirt sleeves. Mom, I'm struggling too, he admitted. You pushed me so hard that I don't know who I am without achievements. Helen's voice lowered. Mark, I only wanted the best. No, he cut in gently. You wanted the appearance of success. And we thought if we weren't perfect, you wouldn't love us. Helen shook her head desperately. That's not true. Then why were you proud only when we achieved something? He asked softly. The rest of the time we didn't exist to you. Sarah finally spoke again. Mom, this isn't an attack. It's the truth. We all grew up afraid. Helen stepped backward slightly, her confidence cracking. Afraid. Of me? Yes, Sarah said simply. Afraid of disappointing you. Afraid of your criticism. Afraid of your silence. Afraid of never being enough. Helen looked around as her family nodded quietly. You pushed us to look perfect, not to be happy, Sarah added. And perfection cost all of us something. Deborah whispered. It cost me my peace. Mark said softly. It cost me my identity. The front door suddenly rang, startling everyone. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes. I know who that is, she said quietly. She walked to the door and opened it to find her boyfriend, Adam, standing outside anxiously. You okay? He asked softly. I'm better now, she whispered. Adam stepped inside, offering a polite smile to everyone. Helen narrowed her eyes. And who is this? She asked sharply. This is Adam, Sarah said proudly. He's a social worker. And he knows everything about this family. Adam nodded. I've heard a lot, Mrs. Brown. Helen scoffed. I'm sure she told you exaggerated stories. Adam shook his head calmly. She didn't exaggerate. What I'm seeing tonight confirms everything. Helen stiffened. Excuse me, Adam continued gently. You criticize, compare, and shame your daughter in front of family. These are signs of emotional harm. How dare you? Helen snapped, but Adam spoke softly. I'm not attacking you. I'm observing. And what I observe is a woman carrying old wounds she never healed. Deborah slowly nodded. Mark looked away. Grandma clasped her hands sadly. Sarah stepped closer to her mother. Mom, you asked earlier what I do with my life. She lifted her chin proudly. I help people heal from childhoods like mine. I help them find confidence after years of being compared and criticized. Helen swallowed hard. You're making me sound like a monster. No, Sarah said softly. I'm showing you how your words shaped me. You can choose to change. But first you have to admit the truth. The entire room waited. For once, Helen had no response. Not anger. Not denial. Only silence. Grandma gently stepped toward Helen. "You can't fix what you refuse to see," she said softly. Helen looked shaken, her confidence slipping like sand through her fingers. I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she whispered. Sarah nodded. "But you did, Mom. And the pain didn't disappear just because we stayed quiet." Deborah wiped her cheeks. "We didn't speak because we were scared," Mark added. "Scared of losing your love." Helen looked around the table, realizing for the first time how alone she truly stood. The weight of everyone's truth pressed heavily on her. John placed his notebook on the table and spoke calmly. "Helen, I didn't file for divorce to punish you. I filed because I refused to watch you hurt our children anymore." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "You're leaving me because of her?" she asked, pointing at Sarah. "No," he said firmly. "I'm leaving because of your choices." Sarah exhaled shakily. Adam rested a comforting hand on her back. Grandma nodded. "Healing starts with honesty, Helen. Your children are hurting. You must face that." Helen sank slowly into her chair, trembling. For the first time that night, Helen's voice softened. "Sarah, I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. Sarah stepped forward. "Start by listening. Start by acknowledging what happened." Helen shook her head slowly. "I thought I was helping. I thought pushing you made you stronger." "It made us scared," Deborah replied gently. "It made us feel like love had conditions." Mark added, "We don't need perfection. We need peace." Helen covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. The room grew quiet, heavy with years of unspoken pain. Adam spoke softly. "You can begin again, Mrs. Brown. But it requires real work. Therapy, reflection, accountability." Helen met his eyes tearfully. "I don't want to lose my family." Sarah's heart softened but stayed firm. "Then fight for healing, not control." Helen swallowed, nodding slightly. Grandma stepped forward and placed a hand on Helen's shoulder. "You have a chance to change your story. Don't waste it." Helen closed her eyes, exhausted. "I'll try," she whispered. Sarah nodded. Trying is a start. But inside, she knew real healing would take time, effort, and humility. The tension eased as everyone slowly shifted back to their seats. John cleared his throat gently. "Why don't we take a moment to breathe?" he suggested. Deborah nodded. "Yes, please." Sarah sat beside Adam, his steady presence grounding her. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "You stood up for yourself with strength and grace." Sarah took a shaky breath. "I'm tired, but I feel lighter." Mark leaned toward her. "You changed this family tonight, Sarah," Deborah added softly. "You gave us permission to speak." Sarah looked around, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, belonging. Grandma lifted her glass gently. Tonight revealed the truth. Painful truth, but necessary. Everyone watched her with quiet respect. "Family isn't built on achievements," she continued. "It's built on love, support, and understanding." Sarah's chest warmed at her grandmother's words. Deborah nodded. "I want our family to be better," she said. "Not perfect, just better." Mark added, "I want to be myself, not what Mom expects." Helen looked down, tears dripping onto her napkin. For the first time she whispered, "I'm sorry." The room stilled, letting her words settle like fragile glass on the table. Sarah didn't rush toward forgiveness. She simply nodded. "Thank you for saying that," she replied softly. "But healing takes more than apologies." Helen wiped her eyes. "I know." Adam looked around the table. "With help and boundaries, families can rebuild. But everyone has to choose healing." Deborah placed her hand gently over Sarah's. "We're choosing it," she said. Mark nodded. "All of us," Grandma added warmly. "Together." For the first time all evening, Sarah felt her shoulders loosen. This wasn't the ending she expected, But it was the beginning of something new. Later that night, after relatives began gathering their coats, Sarah stepped outside for fresh air. Adam followed her, draping his jacket around her shoulders. "Cold out here," he murmured. Sarah smiled faintly. "Not as cold as it felt inside earlier." Adam nodded. "You walked through fire tonight." Sarah looked toward the house, its warm lights glowing softly. "I didn't walk alone," she whispered. "They stood with me." Adam smiled at her proudly. "Because you showed them the truth." Sarah breathed in the crisp night air, feeling her lungs fill with something new, hope. As cars pulled away, Grandma hugged Sarah tightly. "You broke a cycle tonight," she whispered. "I'm proud of you." Deborah hugged her next, tears shining in her eyes. "Can we start over as real sisters?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "I'd like that." Mark hugged her last. "Teach me some of your classes," he joked softly. Sarah laughed. "Deal." When Helen approached, Sarah braced herself. But Helen stopped a few steps away. "I need help," she said quietly. "Real help." Sarah nodded gently. "Then begin, Mom. That's all any of us can do." Sarah and Adam walked to the car hand in hand. She looked back at the house, the place that once held her pain, and felt something shift inside her. She wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. She wasn't the scapegoat or the disappointment. She was the one who stood up, the one who healed, the one who changed everything. "Ready?" Adam asked softly. "Ready," she said with a steady smile. As they drove away, Sarah felt lighter than she ever had. She had spoken her truth, protected her peace, and chosen her future. And finally she felt free.